No.
Yes. Right.
So you guys need an alignment, not coaching.
The coaching industry has exploded.
We want to be better. We want to move forward and keep growing.
Uncoachable is going to be released every single month with a new coach, a new idea, a new approach, and a new takeaway. Hi, I'm John.
I'm Reese, and he's Uncoachable. Hello and welcome to Uncoachable. I'm Reese, and with me is tanned-looking John.
Hello, hello.
Rested and tanned.
Right, well vacationed.
And we are joined today by Lisa Haydon.
Good morning.
Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
How do you want to start this, John? Because usually we would do. Lisa will give you a little bit of an intro before we come in, but we really like you to tell us a little bit about yourself and just briefly introduce us to who you are and what you do and why, I guess.
Okay. So, Lisa Haydon. I am one of those crazy people that left corporate to follow passion and a vision and do the entrepreneurial journey. So I have been doing coaching in big corporates for a lot of years, and that became an intent focus about how that could help leaders and organizations be more successful. So I launched the business, and over the last 8 years, it's been a roller coaster. There have been curveballs from macro conditions, pandemic conditions, and everything thrown in. So we've been ebbing and flowing. And today we are a leadership development solutions firm that leverages human centricity and a tech enablement approach to the way we work with the organizations we support. Amazing.
There's a couple of things that I love about that. One is you've got the same perspective that we do as an entrepreneurial spirit, coming out of a corporate space. I'm curious about your qualifications. What sets you apart as being able to say that you're a coach or a leader? I'm thinking certification. I'm thinking coaching,
yes.
Credentials, all of those elements. Can you speak to that a bit?
Oh yeah. Well, why don't we start with the story? I think that's so I had been coaching. Coaching had always been in my toolbox for a lot of years. And I saw myself as a pretty darn good coach that I leaned into that a lot. And then I hit this place that it just wasn't effective. And it was like, oh. And so me being me, it's like, okay, I need to go explore that. There must be something in the way I'm working with these leaders and partners that I needed to change. And so when I went and did my certification, so I did at Royal Roads, I did my homework. There's lots of programs out there, but anyone who I'd spoken to said, for you and your background, go do Royal Roads. And what I realized was I was a pretty crappy coach.
How did that feel?
Well, let's just say the way that Royal Roads takes you through the experience, there's a lot of what I call inner work. They call it the reflective work, which, for someone who comes from performance culture, was not very comfortable. And then they took us into this systems and organizational learning of how you apply coaching in these large corporate settings. And sort of part of the two together, it was like, oh, that explains a lot. And there was in that the course that I had that aha moment that sparked the reason to leave corporate. But I can tell that for another story. I'm full of stories. But that was sort of that journey that took me into that. And then by background, I'm an operational leader. So I wasn't someone who held my roles very long. I typically was asked to come in and build, grow, start up, turn around. I did some dramatic career changes because I wasn't happy. I wasn't status quo. I'm not a maintenance person. I'm a builder person. So I went to these different leadership roles, team roles, and so that added to the two together. So now that if we sort of fast forward to where I am today, I work mostly if I'm coaching. I work mostly with executives because what they like is that I've sat in their seat. I understand, a P&L. I understand strategy. I understand. So that brings a different perspective. There are a lot of coaches out there who use the coaching label who don't have the certification. There's leadership coaches who have really great HR experience. They've sat in that function, yet haven't run a business. And so that's where, anyone who's got that operational experience, most entrepreneurs, most executives gravitate to them because, there's a familiarity. So from, it was both my experience in corporate and then my certification, which the big corporates use as a quick due diligence and a screen to know that, you get what coaching really is to let you in the door.
right? You're a different guest for us when we think usually of a traditional coach. You're more into the leadership sphere as well as into large organizations, and part of that is what you do, but it's also where you come from. So it gives you that credibility on it. The leadership piece, Reese, I think, had told me a quote that talked about people typically rise to their level of incompetence. And so I'm really good at a job, and I get promoted into a job where I'm leading people, but I'm not a leader. I'm actually a doer. And all of a sudden I've gotten into the position of incompetence.
Yeah.
I identify with your restlessness of you want to build, and I kind of I think that you want to build something, launch it, and then go, right, what's next? I totally identify with that. But I wanted to go back to the kind of corporate setting we're coaching. So like, were you trained internally, or was it kind of like, I guess I feel like that must have been like a really big moment for you to realize that you'd hit this kind of almost like a plateau, and then you had this wake up call. Like, did that like really change you in your perspective? Did that kind of drive that hunger, or was it just kind of a real like reflection point for you?
Yeah, I think my DNA is as a learner. So I've hit many of those. So that your two comments are interconnected in that every time I hit a plateau, I go off to figure it out.
That's amazing,
right? And then to figure that out, you have to do some learning agility, some reflection, some uncomfortable work. And if I come back to one of the things you raised in your question, part of the certification was this practicum piece. Like, you had to practice in front of mentor coaches. You had to have practice clients. You had these mentor coaches and very seasoned coaches sitting in on your coaching conversations. You don't get that in corporate. At the level I was at, I wasn't getting any of that. So the feedback loop, the discomfort in doing things that were so foreign, I'd been more than 20 years in corporate, so I had my lane. So it really, so it stretched me, but I'd always been, that's not working. That's a problem. Go figure it out. So it was a familiar state that I was okay working through. So I think some people might label it as being very change adept or change junkie, depending how you want to look at it.
Which is, it's actually in conflict, I think, from what you do, which is if you go into organizations and improve leadership and make sure that everyone gets onto the same page, and you leave the organization with a good blueprint. Reese had sort of alluded to, he's always looking at that next thing. What do we do next? And is also a change junkie, really thrives in the chaos to solve problems as they arise. And it seems to be a bit of a conflict. One is, let me build processes and systems and operational efficiency and be a change expert. How do you sort of do both and coach for both? Because his greatest skill is the ability to say, I can problem solve anything that comes my way, keep bringing new things to me, and I'll
Bring me your problems.
Absolutely.
I love problems.
But process, if you say, by the way, you've got to do it this way, he'll go, no, I don't think I do.
Yeah.
And he'll challenge you and come up with a better process, and then next week it's like, I think I can do a better process. In fact, I forget what the last process was. I'm moving right?
I can't remember what I did yesterday. But.
So there's the conflict or contrast probably in your own thinking of, I need to put systems in place, and I'm a change maker, or I like the chaos of change. I'm guessing. I don't know.
Let's put the variable in it. How predictable are people?
Right.
Very unpredictable. Yeah.
So
people are messy and chaotic, and that's what makes them human.
I don't know about that. I think if you gave people the exact same circumstances and had all of the variables consistent, the reaction would be relatively the same. I think everything around us are never consistent, and that's why change is around us, and we have to then adapt to it.
I see the world totally opposite.
So this is interesting. So I would be of the view that no two people are the same.
Right, I agree with that. Yeah,
and that means that how we show up, how we react, is both who we are and our experiences. So the example I always use is an iceberg. There's what you see in the way we interact, and then there's all that you don't see that goes really deep, which is upbringing, values, education, right? All those experiences. So, in my experience, and part of what keeps my brain going is that people are, there's a predictability framing. There's a lot of unpredictability that focuses and comes up, if you have the academic framing would be Tuckman model, forming, storming, norming, performing. And any time you change a person, you change the performing state back to one of the iterations.
I've never heard of that model. Could you explain that to me?
So it's called Tuckman Team Maturity. It's old, but it's a great way of thinking of, the journey that teams go through to that. Ultimately, we all want to get to that performing state, right? Whether it be in the commercialization, the scale, the achieving metrics, whatever it might be. And, when you so in startup world, you bring a team together, you form. And then there's always this storming, which is, a messy stage as you're figuring out how you like to work, how I like to work. Well, how do we tie in our financial metrics, our business objectives? How do we understand our clients? And then norming is okay, I know how you work. I know how I work. We got our rhythm. And then the performing is when you actually get to the output. So it's just, it's this
5
rhythm.
years later, we're still in the storming.
Well, no, I was going to say that, but there's the desire as well. So the forming, I thrive in the form space. I've got an idea. Let's get this started and go in a particular direction. The storming is probably where you're sort of more adaptive to actually start to have deliverables.
Just give me an umbrella.
It is absolute chaos, but it is doing something extraordinary. The performing piece is probably where we're now sitting back going, how is this all working? And making sure that we've got metrics around it, and that becomes the unusual conversation. The decline or the stability of the last step is the one that we are not inspired to be in, I don't think. Right?
I really like that model. It's a really good way of describing the business journey and everything as well, which is cool. One of the things that is really interesting that you're doing is the seismic generational shifts and preparing leaders for those generational shifts. Now, John, you're Gen X. I'm kind of what they call geriatric millennial, I think they called, or Zennial, or elder millennial.
Sounds like a millennial to actually just more qualify
top
yourself
end,
to make sure you're more unique, not just a millennial. What kind of millennial are
special
you?
type of millennial.
I'm just a general
the
Gen Xer.
oldest, you're just a store brand Gen X.
We're all the same.
Careful, I'm a Gen X too.
but then we have some Gen Z team members as well. So and
boomers.
And,
not in your team.
Oh no, but we have clients as well who are who are boomers and.
But what a diverse workforce.
Yes, I got kids who are Gen Alpha as well. I don't even know where to start with that. But anyway, that'll be your next project.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in terms of help? Because values, how people communicate, the vastness of difference between some of those groups is huge.
Yeah. And let's start with, I don't have to talk about this from an anecdotal place, because if you ask other people to answer this, they will tell you the stories about the frustrations, the irritations, the misalignment, the ineffectiveness of, one of their millennial workforce. And so it was 3 years ago, we'd been doing a consulting project, and the team, we'd actually used Dalhousie's Cobra Consulting. And this group of, young millennials had said, they're MBA students, they did our trends and research report, and they said, can we talk to you about something? And, after they delivered their deliverable, and we're like, yeah. They're like, we don't see ourselves in this definition of leadership. And we were like, okay. And so that started a second phase that took us into this. Well, what's happening in the workforce, and how do you define what that is? And so we've been on this journey, and so we did the research. We really dug into what they provided us, and we had a leadership diagnostic that really represented how I defined leadership, and so we call that traditional leadership. And so what started to emerge with it was this modern leadership that represented the millennial workforce, and many of the Gen Zs who've gone through the diagnostic experience would say they identify with it as well. But at the core of it, purpose matters, collaboration matters, coaching matters. And so there's this and diversity. So those are sort of the themes you hear. And so we've just published a blueprint. It started as a white paper, but in the ideas and in sort of the evolution we went through, we ended up producing a blueprint, which obviously gives that leadership development system to think about. But what clearly came through is that the millennial demographic sees the world in a broad global view, and diversity is important. So it's not just about what's happening in Halifax, what's happening in Nova Scotia. They want that global view. Inspiration is important and precedes motivation. So that spark precedes that fuel. Flex capacity, meaning, you want to ideate, we're going to talk in ideas. You want to talk about clear process, that's the way we're going to connect and interact. And then interestingly, the other piece which we know, but then came out in our insights, is tech agility. And there's two sides to it. So while the millennial demographic was born and raised using tech, and so they're very tech natives. Part of it is that they have that expectation of whoever they're working with demonstrates and role models that tech agility as well. So those were just a couple. There's so many things that surfaced, but we found the multipliers that matter to performance. We found the constraints that held back millennials. So then we've got this really nice, clear way of these teams thinking about the way they work together, which ultimately means that somebody's got to flex, right? We talk about flex capacity. That's our own term. It's that how do you agilely adapt to connect and meet people where they are? I mean, we've all had those conversations where it's like this. Yep. But, it's not dramatic, but just that little bit of flex so that you are closer in the way you connect. And that's hugely important. So, if the traditional leader, if I flex to meet a millennial leader, what's the power, the very high impact that's connected by being closer in the way they have a conversation, they explore something and they get work done. And that's ultimately that outcome, that getting work done to the outcome is what everybody's aligned around.
It's almost a cliche as well to imagine like this, very senior boomer position, and then like people coming up and like the clash of, process and people getting frustrated and, staff retention and, you can imagine it. And, there's so many kind of instances where it's like played out in films and media and books and everything. So like how does, I suppose like the stakes must be so high for those companies to kind of overcome those barriers because people are retiring, expertise is leaving, and they need that kind of continuity, I guess.
Yes, if they're open to it. So here's the interesting tension point. It is a tale of two reactions. So there are the leaders. So most in the big organizations, most of the senior leadership table is filled with Xers and boomers. Some say that it is up to the millennials to flex to the playbook that's been known and proven for years. And then there's another set of leaders who say there's a modernization that needs to take place, that needs to reflect a multi-generation, a diverse and a macro climate that is changing faster than we've ever known. So it's interesting, that perspective. And even a couple of our clients have been like, "Oh, Lisa, you're overextending on this whole multi-generational need to modernize your leadership development theme." So it's interesting how that's playing out.
It gets back to the problem that you're trying to solve. And if you're trying to solve things like sustainability or even finding a new workforce or growth or whatever that piece is, it almost answers that question. If I am a legacy business and I have legacy processes that's led by legacy individuals, I can't imagine the friction to have change come in to say, let's try something new, which means I think you need to have a fundamental cultural change within that organization to move forward.
Yes, and let's talk about what change means. I mean, when people talk about change and change management, often it's connected to process and systems. When we talk about this leadership and leadership performance, it's personal change, right? It's behavioral change, which is the most uncomfortable. There's a slower effect, right? And it's like there's no book on leadership that gives you the answer. You've just got to step in and say, okay, that last conversation didn't go as well as it should. Let me go back into this conversation with a shifted intent of the way I connect with that team member.
Yeah, I love the conversation around perspective and intention. So if you can understand somebody's intention, it gives you a lot of latitude to that conversation. What are we trying to do? I may say it wrong. I may hear it wrong. But if I understand what the intention is, it changes that conversation a little bit.
Do you find, as the kind of like Gen Xer in our team, do you ever sometimes I feel like there's some misunderstandings and in terms of approaching and
Reese, that's a great question in regards to the friction amongst generations as you're having conversations about things like, what am I misconstruing? Just in conversations. But I prefer a team culture that tries to buck those traditional trends. So I'm in the office, I'm the oldest one here, but I'm actually the tech expert. I'm the one that goes to fix all of the tech problems, and I'm not a digital native, but I've had to solve those problems over the years, right? That said, as a Gen Xer, I'm just happy to have a job.
You also skateboard.
Well, I'm also in denial.
He's got the cool effects.
Right. I'm still trying to find myself.
No, I'd say you are very like to use your terminology. You do flex your weight. I kind of don't think you're rigid in it, and I think that sometimes I think because I'm like millennial, I think sometimes I'm lazy and I just assume Gen Z is, and often my go-to is like, I'll make a joke, I'll use their language in a British accent and go, well, this girly pop's going for lunch, and they'll do it. And then they know I get them.
Yeah.
So. But it's a wonderful dialogue, and I'm curious, as you were doing this research, did you start to see pairings that may have said a millennial wants to be led this way or leads this way, and then therefore do they better pair with, say, a baby boomer that is in a second generational job or something? Some type of shift,
yes,
right?
absolutely. So we, because of our, the way we approached the data and the amount of data we had, we were able to create some AI-enabled correlations, and then we coach interpreted them. So at the core of everything we do is coach methodology. Like that never, even though we got deep into this analytics-based insight, the contextualization was, if this is the data story, what does that mean for a way a leader can connect, create higher impact? Because obviously, I grew up in performance cultures, which means, I'm always on the, what is the result we need to achieve? How do we get at that, better, more effective? How do we, punch through these obstacles? Because that's the reality. There's always going to be something. So we did, and it's in the blueprint. We're going to go public with it in September. So it's all written and drafted out. So those connections, patterns are very clearly spelled out, and from both perspectives. So the what's coming live in September is from a traditional leader working with millennial leaders, but the next wave that's not formally, it's mapped but not documented, is around how a millennial leader can optimize their career, and we've got very clear what we call dimensions in the way that that when they work on those, focus those, develop them, that will elevate their own leadership career.
Oh, fantastic! Great.
Yeah.
Have you got any stories of like I don't know, maybe people who were very skeptical of that kind of intergenerational development and like but you've kind of like seen them overcome and kind of totally reframe how they deal with those other generations that they need to kind of connect with?
I would say the journey isn't what we've influenced; it's the experience. So if people are really focused on their team and their organization, there will be those events that happen. So for example, we were brought in to do some work and with an organization around being future-ready leaders, because they had lost one of their highest-performing millennial leaders, and they didn't see it coming, and they could do nothing to keep them. And they did not want to go through that again. And so they're like, what are we missing, right? So that retention piece was something they wanted to get, understand, that status quo was not going to work going forward. So how do they get clearer on that, keeping that person, that team member that they really wanted to keep? So, while, we can logically show them the data, talk about our experience, it's the lived experience that really fuels the drive to make the shift, the change, the intent about a forward-looking view on leadership.
Did you ever diagnose why that person left? Did they qualify
No,
it?
we didn't. We didn't. Yeah. And that's, so don't get me too far off track, but there's this whole talent screening work that's been built out of our diagnostic work, and that would be part of it in sort of that where you can do some of that more intentional. Is it the persona? Is it the role? Was it the team? Was it the organization? Right? And because sometimes it could be, it's right role, right work, right time. And, sort of there's so many variables, right? And I think, back to your earlier question about, is there enough to keep your brain going? Yes, because there's so many factors that can play into it. Each organization, each team, each leader has this little bit of nuance that, you're going to want to explore, because it's not cut and dried.
Yeah.
And that's, I always say, ask people, 10 people for, what they, say is leadership and what they think is important in leadership. And you're going to get 10 very different answers.
Yeah. I would suspect that if it's a millennial subset, it's that purpose piece, but also the future state.
Yeah.
And it's the mix up between those two that really, from a retention standpoint, is very difficult. Reese and I often talk about psychological income, which is everything outside of the money piece that still is the reward for being a part of this journey. And I love the idea about making sure that you're still transparent and sharing, what are we doing, where are we going, and be open and have those conversations. But
one of the things I'll add that, so part of our work was not just data. We actually experientially did these persona debriefs. So we got to spend a lot of time with a group of millennial leaders. And one of the aspects that came very clear that stood out, especially for me being a traditional leader, they think down into their team. How do I need to support my team? What do they need from me? I'm going to work alongside you. I'm really focused on you. I was schooled in the work across, work up, and then work down, right? So they've just got this very intent of teaming, being in sync with their team. What does their team need to be successful in a much more intentional and clear way than I would have identified in the way that I worked within my organization. So an interesting piece there. And I do want to come back to your comment about, while we're talking large enterprise, I do work with scaling tech companies, and there is a translation to what we call that persona piece. So the competencies of enacting leadership are subtly different, but that hardwiring, the way that, the human-centric piece is the same.
Interesting.
Right? So that's that, there's, yes, some nuances, but the high-performance leaders I work with enterprise and high-performance leaders in scaling tech companies, there's a lot of similarities.
Interesting. Because I don't think Reese and I could survive in a large enterprise.
No.
Did I get you off guard? I'm sorry.
I was envisioning the discomfort that would bring.
I was just thinking, actually, I was just having a flashback. So my dream was always to work for the BBC, which is obviously like a large institution, like big organization, tons of opportunity, tons of directions you can go.
You're going to do the Morgan Freeman line.
What's that?
About being an institutional man.
No, but I went there and I didn't survive a year. I didn't like it at all. It was very rigid, and there was a particular kind of culture and everything, and it didn't suit me. And there was this producer who would be, I guess he'd be the boomer generation. He'd been there for 35 years, and he had so many TV awards. He'd started gluing them to his desk, and he'd love watching people come and try and pick them up. But he said to me, we had lunch one day, and he was like, because he was kind of coming to the end of his career. I was at the beginning of mine. He was like, "Don't stay here. Don't become me. I'm institutionalized."
Wow.
Which is some advice I took to heart from him.
So one of the things I always said, I was an entrepreneur in big corporate. Yeah. I drove my bosses nuts. So because I knew what was needed, and I could get there, but I often wanted to go my own way to get there, which was frustrating, because that's, the shareholder, they have a playbook that works so well, and they love leaders who execute on the playbook. And if I execute on the playbook the way they want, I get bored. So it's like, oh, well, let's find another way to get there. So I did work around the constraints, but my poor bosses would say that I was a frustrating team member at times.
One of the things that you focus on as well, and something you talk about, is the confidentiality, the idea that people in a leadership role sometimes don't have a safe space to talk in a way where they're kind of totally not concerned about consequences, politics, how they feel.
It's lonely at the top is what you're trying to say?
Lonely at the top, it is. Yeah,
right, okay.
Yeah. And that a coach can be that person they can lean into. So, tell us a little bit about that kind of perspective.
Yeah, where to start with that one? So I think there's a lot that goes on as an executive, a senior leader, as a CEO, and so you always have these accountability, and I'd say they always stay in flex state, and so there's always this very quick filter. None of us see it, but what do I say? What do I provide? And there are those moments that they're human too, and they just need that place to say it exactly as they want. Right? This goes back to flex capacity. Where are those places that I can just be me? I can say it exactly as I want to say it, and there's no consequence. And so those, you're either, accountable to, banks, investors, to, other team members, to the employees, to your family. And so the coaching relationship is about that confidential place, and, someone who, with the passage of time gets to know you and who you are, know your work, your organization, and be able to contextualize, appreciate, and be able to, listen to you, sometimes just, put what's out of your mind on the table and put some new insights. So to either play it back, to explore things, right? And that's the coaching methodology. And many executives bring an executive coach for many years along with them, because they start to see that I've got this place that's just my space. I don't have that very often, and I just get to focus on me, and I just get to be me. And along that journey, because of the coaching methodology, the way you work with me, we're going to unpack and sort through these things. And I think that's, back, if I tie this back to your question about, my capabilities and credentials, a lot of times these leaders, their brains are huge, and there's a lot that goes through that. And when they download, it's very rapid, and there's a lot of pieces there. And just some of the experience and my own business acumen lets me sort through a lot of information pretty quickly, and often find a pattern that's there, but in their head they can't find it. But when they talk it through with someone else, it's uncovered. And I'm not finding the answer, I'm just finding things to pick up and explore. So again, it goes back to that, not just that space, but also having that partner. And in this case, we're talking about a coach that has they bring this capability and capacity that the two of you together do some, give the executive a great place to, have their own time to sort through some things, and to have that augment of some new insights, some new perspective. Always in coaching language, you talk about that disruptive thought, that aha moment. And typically every coaching conversation has at least one. And that's what really great coaches do. And it's not what I think is the aha moment. It's the, what you found in your journey, because everything is rattling around there, and you're the one that knows you best, your role best, your organization best. Oftentimes you just need that little thread that kind of takes it in a different direction and enables it to settle out, sort through, or problem solve.
That must mean you develop some really long-term personal relationships with people, even as they move to a different organization. Mm-hmm. Do you find that? Or
yes.
What's the longest kind of coaching relationship you've had in those terms?
So the longest one would be 5 years, and then I had to fire them because there is a life cycle to coaching, and when you get too close to someone, your objectivity, is then starts to get clouded, right? And that's sort of and as well. Being someone who's very change adept, I believe in change. I think that mixing things up always creates, a better dynamic. And so you do reach that point. So while I would love to say I have had clients for 20 years, I don't think that's in the best interest of leaders. I think that, and some may come back, but they need to go and experience that sort of the different styles, those different personas as part of it. And that's, I think, part of the value and the return on investment that leaders can unlock by working with a coach.
I love that notion of firing a client. It's an ethical element, because if you walk away from business, it means it was the wrong business and you did it for the right reasons. It's the same thing with firing a client or a relationship. There's a couple of things that are sort of going through my head. I guess the last question for me as we wrap this up is, Reese and I are self-professed uncoachable individuals. Which is either we take good advice on our own terms, but typically to have somebody regularly structure something, we sort of rail against that. So what are your thoughts on us being uncoachable?
Well, based on my experience with you, you're curious, you're open, there's humility, and I would say there is coachability there, but it's on your terms, and so that and it can be over time. So that would be, there's some people that they take time to digest something, and so it's not that they're uncoachable, it's just timing and alignment.
You'd fire us so fast.
You think?
Well, and if you could give us one piece of wisdom or something to keep in mind kind of after this this episode. What do you think? Is there any kind of takeaway you could give us?
Well, based on what you shared in the way you talk about the team and the diversity of the team, you've got good role clarity, yet there may be this focus on the ideas at sometimes the not full intent on the outcomes, is leveraging your team more. So, what are you doing and continuing to do that you want to keep doing, but you could, outsource to your team that would really, as a collective group, enable, the achieving what you're doing here and focused on.
I think John would agree. That's a good observation, particularly to me.
Oh,
because that's what I really struggle with.
Well, you're not alone.
Lisa, thank you so much. You mentioned the blueprint.
Yeah.
If people are interested to kind of take a look at it or learn more about the work you're doing, where can they find it?
So pivotalgrowthinc.com on the website. We've got a LinkedIn page, company page, Pivotal Growth, and we'll start to release it there. And so you'll follow it there, or follow me as well. And I always post thought leadership and little nuggets. I share little stories about our work with organizations and companies. So we're excited to share more, and it'll create a very interesting conversation amongst leaders and organizations. So looking forward to being part of that.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I love
you.
the conversation. I appreciate the invite and joining you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa.
Great.
The best place to find this podcast is wherever you find podcasts.
That's where I'd start.